Okay, so as people are filing in, just some brief background. First off, obviously, thank you to everyone who is attending tonight. I know in our current situation where we work on our computers and go to school on our computers, I'm sure the last thing we all want to do is to get back on our computers at 7 to attend something social and fun. So we really appreciate it, especially if it means supporting an independent bookstore. For those who aren't local, Belmont Books is located in the greater Boston area. If you buy any books tonight, if you're local, we do offer free curbside pickup. The store is open for browsing, so if you miss being in a bookstore, we would love to have you. But we also ship around the US. And with everything digital, we have a pretty robust events calendar. So this is our last event for this week, but we will pick back up on Monday. We have an event with comedian Joe Coy in conversation with Chelsea Handler. So we're very excited about that. We have an event with Elizabeth Wilcox on Tuesday, the 23rd, about her memoir. And then on Wednesday, we have an event with Matteo Ascaripour, who is going to talk about Black Buck, which is his debut kind of like speculative fiction. It's really good. So we hope you will join us for that. If you haven't attended one of our events before, I will introduce the authors joining us tonight, kind of turn it over to them for about 45 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A at about quarter till. If you look at the bottom of your screens, you'll see a Q&A button that looks like two little speech bubbles. You can submit your questions there, or feel free to put them in the chat, but it's just easier for me to see them. But feel free to direct your questions to Robert and Michael, since they have kind of like some shared experiences, or one or the other. Totally up to you. But I will introduce both of them, turn it over, and that'll be it. It usually runs about an hour. So we will start with our in conversation partner tonight, Robert Cocuzzo. For the last 10 years, he has served as the editor of N Magazine, a seasonal lifestyle publication based on the island of Nantucket. During that time, he has authored 2 critically acclaimed books, Tracking the Wild Kumba, The Life of Legendary Skier Doug Coombs, and The Road to San Donato, Father, Sons, and Cycling Across Italy. He has also contributed to a number of publications, including Departures, Esquire, Outside, and Luxury. And now the author we are celebrating tonight, Michael Tougias, who is a writer born in Longmeadow, Massachusetts. You might have heard him on Radio Boston. Was it earlier today?
Yes.
Michael? Yeah, earlier today. He writes about maritime, travel, and adventure topics, is a New York Times bestselling author of 25 books, and has appeared as a guest on various NPR programs, 2020, and more. His book, The Finest Hours, The True Story Behind the U.S. Coast Guard's Most Daring Rescue, which came out in 2009 and was co-authored by Casey Sherman, was adapted as a Disney film by the same name, and it was released in 2016. Has that made its way to Disney Plus yet, Michael?
I believe so.
All right. That's great. Maybe I'll give it a watch. So thank you all for joining me. I will turn it over to Robert and Michael and be back in a little bit. Thanks, guys.
Perfect. Thank you for that
Thank
lovely
you.
introduction. Well, Michael, appreciate you doing this. As I said to you earlier today, I just loved your memoir. I found it to be so enchanting. And as we were talking about before we got on, just going into these vivid stories of your past, your childhood, exploring the relationships within your family, your friends. I mean, it was just a real great journey. So I appreciate you taking us on it. I thought where we could start off, having written a memoir myself about family, I wanted to ask a question that continually came to my mind as I was writing. And the question was, who is this for? Why should someone care about my life? Why am I putting it out there? And what do I hope that they can take away from it? Because when I was writing, I always found that to be this question that lurked over each keystroke. And I'm curious to know how you would answer that question.
Well, The Waters Between Us is a kind of an unusual book in that, I'm combining a lot of humorous stories of growing up where I always bit off more than I could chew or wanted to tackle every adventure in the world. But then, as you get into the book, you see the strained relationship with my father. And then a little bit later in the book, you see this family tragedy and how my father responded. So, the book kind of morphed from the early days of wanting to share these stories of the outdoors, some life-threatening, some just funny. It morphed more into this relationship with my father and his response to adversity. And maybe that's why it took me so long to write. Normally, a book takes me 18 months, half that time of research, the other half dedicated to writing. This one I'd been chipping away at for years, putting notes in files, partial chapters. And it wasn't until my father passed away that I really said, okay, put this together. People need to see how one man reacted in the face of overwhelming odds. It's really inspirational. And I couldn't have done it while he was alive because he would have never allowed me to do it. He made that clear. But then later, after he passed away, I said, I can't tell my story without including him and what happened in our family. So, I wanted to be totally honest. I had just recently read Maya Angelou's I Know Why Caged Birds Sing, and I said, she's putting it all out there. I got to do the same. Don't hold anything back. Show myself warts and all. And so that's what I tried to do. But yeah, I couldn't have done it while my dad was still alive.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your dad, because he's a vivid character in the book. He's a strong, proud Greek immigrant, works at his family's bakery, a really hardworking individual. And what I found interesting, and it connects with me because I had a similar experience with my father. You only really started to fully understand him and what drove him when you went to work with him, getting in the car at 4 a.m. to go to the bakery. So what was this character like, and just the different ways that manifested in your life as you grew older?
Right, he was like two different people at the bakery. He was like a machine because this was a small factory and the work was backbreaking. And here I am, a young man, I couldn't keep up with him. And then, it hit me, my God, he's been doing this every day, his whole life, even worked Sundays. So there was that side of him, just get that work done. But outside of the bakery, this guy just loved life and loved people. And whoever it was, whether it was a gas station attendant or whatever, would go, Art, how are you? And that big smiles. And I was like, wow, I don't see other people getting that reaction. And if he walked into a party, he'd have a martini. Next thing you know, he'd have some wallflower out dancing with him. And this is a party that everybody's quiet. So he was definitely a character. But back in those days, the dads in particular, I have two grown children. I was much more involved with their lives than my father was with mine. And now I realize it was because he was working so damn hard.
Right.
He didn't have time. He never came to my soccer games or wrestling matches. And our relationship was very strained because I was constantly getting in trouble, causing him gray hair. And he's just wondering, why can't you be like my other kids? Right. And I didn't have an answer. I didn't know why I couldn't.
Yeah, one of the interesting things you said on that front was the idea that you kind of deduced that maybe the reason why that relationship was strained was the impact that you were having on your mother, and that this was just really, it was a tremendous strain on her, and out of protection for her, he was kind of acting on her behalf. I'm going forward here a little bit, but it's interesting because your career and what you do resonated so much with his passions, because he was such a well-read individual. He had a massive collection of books throughout the house, which were all history oriented. So did you find that your relationship, as you pursued your career, started to mend, or was the mending already underway, especially in the wake of your sister's tragedy?
It was,
which you can tell people.
Yeah. it was well underway as I matured. Probably we'd probably turn the corner around age 18. That's what I realized. This was even before my sister's terrible car accident, which we'll talk about. But I went to Boston College, had a bad experience living off campus, went into a depression, and when I needed my dad, he was there. I was shocked. I just said, I'm dropping out of school. I thought he'd blow his top, the first generation to go to college. He did not. He said, I'll be right there. I could tell you're in a tough position. And I was like, wow. So it started to improve then. But you hit the nail on the head. I do think his response in the earlier years was, my mother just couldn't control me. So she'd wait till your father get home kind of thing. And I recently bumped into an aunt, and she said, oh, yeah, when your name came up with your mother, she'd just break down crying, going, I don't know what to do with them.
Right.
And I was like, really? I said, I didn't know it was that bad. She goes, oh, yeah. She just didn't know. So my father dragged his ass home from work, exhausted, and boom, he'd be hit with, here's the latest of what Michael did.
Right, because for those watching, and I'd love you to, you should definitely pick this book up and read it. So we're going to be careful on how much we tell you about, but just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, Michael, growing up, you were a pretty rambunctious kid. You spent many consecutive days in detention, probably set a record there at Longmeadow High School or Longmeadow Grammar School. But the other character in this book that emerges is less one with a face, but it's nature, the environment becomes this kind of refuge for you. Can you talk a little bit about that and how this kind of threads through the book, these vivid descriptions of experiences you've had, right from the beginning with going fishing with your brother and at dusk or early in the morning?
Right. I do think, my love of the outdoors probably saved me, particularly in my wildest years when I was going down the wrong path. Back when I went to school, they had groupings, in middle school from, quote, the dumbest to the smartest. And I'm way down in the dumbest. And I'm not getting out of it because I'm just making jokes and having fun in class, trying to impress girls, drinking beer that we took from people's garages, all the things that you probably shouldn't be doing at such a young age. But thank God I had that outlet of calling up a friend or two and saying, let's go down to the meadows by the Connecticut River. The big carp are trapped in a pool and get them. And that, led to some life-threatening experiences because I was always corralling people to try things, such as going down the Huntington River in my $15 raft from Bradley's department store in April, where the water's just roaring. But, it was that solace of being in nature and that longing for a cabin of my own that you and I have in common. It's so funny that when we emailed back and forth that we both had that childhood dream and we both tried to make it happen.
Yeah. And just with with those adventures in nature, I think the other word in there is misadventure. And talk a little bit how misadventure, it's a recurring theme in the book, because I think that these chapters unfold with these beautifully laid out descriptions of this, the setting and the different, flowers and just, you can really feel it. But then it's followed quickly with some harebrained scheme to like go to the other side of the lake in the middle of a, big windstorm. Misadventure is such a critical thing, right? In telling stories.
Yeah, I'll give you one example, and maybe I'll read just a sentence or two from it. But we finally convinced my younger brother, who was, let's see, at the time I would have been about, say I'm 15, he would have been very young. He would have been like 7. And he was outdoorsy too. We convinced my parents to take us to Moosehead Lake. And as soon as we got there, I go, come on, Bob, let's go. And my father goes, whoa, where are you going? I said, oh, we want to, explore. He goes, all right, be back in an hour and take care of Bob, will you, Mike? I'm like, oh yeah, you got it. So we God, we only walked like 10 minutes away and we see a moose and it's feeding in this bog. And I go, Bob, this is great. I got my camera. Let's start creeping up and getting a picture. And, back then it was a cheap little camera, no zoom lens. I'm going, this is going to come out terrible. There's brush and stuff. We got to get closer. And of course, he's the younger brother, so he's doing what I say. And I go, this still isn't working. Let's get closer. And then I say, well, now it's got its head the wrong way. And I go, you know what? And this is going through my head. There's a good mic, the smart mic, and the dumb mic. One's like, if I threw a rock, then he'd lift his head up. I get the perfect picture. And the other thing is going, I don't know, you're pretty close. This is my brain going back and forth. So I'm going to just find that part in the book of what happens.
Yeah, that's a great scene.
I laugh about it even now. God, I wish my father were alive to read this story, because he had never, the book wasn't out and I hadn't written this up. So let's see. The back and forth is going. The dumb Mike shot back. When are you ever going to get this close to a moose again? Don't be a chicken. Get the picture or no one will believe you. And then I jump ahead where I throw the rock, hoping not to hit the moose, but to land near it. That is not what happened. The rock hit the moose in the rump. Then all hell broke loose. For a big, ungainly creature, this moose sure did move fast. It whipped its head from the water, spray flinging from its snout high into the air. Then it let out a deep snort, wheeled around, and looked directly at us. I held my breath. The bull flattened its ears, lowered its head. Instinct told me it was coming for us, and I hollered to Bob, "Run for your life!" And I ran, branches whipping me in the face. I looked over my shoulder. Bob was behind me, and behind Bob was the enraged moose. The beast had already crossed half the bog and was probably about 70 feet behind us, coming on strong. Somewhere in the back of my head, I'm sure I thought, how am I going to explain this to my parents if I return without Bob?
Yeah.
It's just these impulsive things that can, a lot of boys have. I probably had ADD and it was never diagnosed. But somehow I survived them all,
Well, I think there's a wonderful commentary that happens in this book, and you really just kind of allude to it throughout these stories, especially because you're having these like Huckleberry Finn type adventures. And one of the things that you often say at the end of these kind of stories is how today's youth don't have those opportunities to really experience that type of childhood without devices, even like at the end where you're talking about trying to navigate home without the use of a cell phone.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? Can you just talk a little bit about today's youth? I know you're a father too, but they were kind of, if I'm doing my math, they were probably the tail end of that Huckleberry Finn type childhood. Although There is that great excerpt you give about your son writing from summer camp saying the food sucks, I hate being here. Like it was a total juxtaposition from your experience. But talk a little bit about today's youth and kind of the missed opportunity they might have right now.
Just in the terms of, say, summer camp, back then it was a generalized summer camp, so you learned a little bit of everything: archery, riflery, canoeing, and we'd go on overnight trips that didn't go as planned. We got swept off our feet crossing a river, so now we had to sleep in wet sleeping bags. And today it seems like so many of the camps are specialized, it might be a tennis camp. There's even computer camps. But anyways, so now here I am, a dad many years later, after having wonderful experiences at these camps where anything goes. You would have, counselors, they just let you do what you wanted. So I say to my son, you're going to love it. I found a camp for you way up at the border of New Hampshire and Maine, and you're going to love it. And so in the book, I first put in some of my postcards home, and I write about the exciting experiences. And one postcard, my mom kept them for me. That's why I know what I said. One postcard only says, "Dear Mom, say hello to Dad," and that was it. And then, others are, "I'm having a great time. When you visit, bring candy and underwear." And so I send my son, and in the book I said, "I have high hopes." Here's what my son wrote back to me. "Dear Dad, this camp absolutely sucks. The food stinks. I hate my counselor. It's boring. When can you come and get me?" So it's just like, I tried. So,
well, I just wonder. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, in many respects, I was lucky my dad was not an outdoorsman, because he was never, quote, expertising, saying, "Here's how it should be done." I kind of had to learn by trial and error. And I think that's a useful skill for later in life. When problems come my way, I go, "I'll figure it out somehow. I've been in so many jams."
Right. And I guess that's what my concern is. I have a little daughter now, and my childhood it was actually quite similar to yours in some respects, in that there was a lot of, we would jump on our bikes and ride for the
Yeah.
whole day. We'd be gone. My parents would have no idea where we were. We might be 30 miles away on a long, long bike ride. And there's this independence, and there was this camaraderie amongst friends. And there was obviously the devices weren't part of our lives. So there was a much more vivid connection with being outside, doing things that might be a little, risky in our
Right.
context, like, riding a scary trail or something like that. But I worry about, this generation today, where there's just, the world just seems to prohibit it, whether it be,
Yeah.
the helicopter parenting, or the sense of that we can't just let our kids go out, riding around on their bikes by themselves. And so I just wonder what that's going to be like for that next generation that also is seemingly genetically wired to want to have a phone in their hands.
Yeah, and I think they're going to miss some of the joy that you and I had then in the woods, and that we still have now. Because I have this cabin. That was my goal. I still have it. It was a dream come true. So my kids, I've been taking them there since they were infants. But when they would bring guests up to this remote cabin without plumbing, way up in the woods above this lake, every now and then one of their guests would freak out, because they're not used to the quiet or the darkness, or even they wouldn't swim in the lake. And I'm like, "This is one of the most clean lakes in the world."
Right.
And they're like, "I don't know what's in there. I've never swam in a lake." I'm like, "You haven't swam in a lake?"
Right.
So
Yeah.
I just fear they're missing out. And I fear as parents, we've swung too far trying to protect them, that 99% of the time they're going to be perfectly safe playing in the woods in the neighborhood behind the house, a group of them.
Right.
And we shouldn't stop that.
Yeah, well, I hope they get a copy of your book, because I think that if they read those passages, I mean, it's hard not to just feel the fun of that childhood and the exploration, and
Right.
just the trial and error, like you said. I mean, the fishing adventures you went on, and the moose encounters, and all that business. Because you raised it, I do want to introduce the cabin idea, because it is another one of these characters and themes that kind of strings through the book. And as we discussed earlier, I obviously had this childhood dream myself of someday having a place in the mountains, and was lucky enough to fulfill that. I was curious to know, and I was talking to my wife about this before our talk here, because my vision of why I wanted a cabin was very, I had this kind of picture in my head of like what it would be for me. It'd be a place to write. It would be a place to ski from. And so I'm curious, especially for the readers or the listeners here, what was the cabin? What did it represent for you? And how did that kind of carry through your life?
I wanted something more remote than suburban Longmeadow, where I grew up. And at the time, that town still had a lot of woods and wild places, but it wasn't Vermont. It wasn't the mountains, the lakes, the rivers. And so we used to vacation in Vermont. I just fell in love with the state and had this dream for a cabin, tried to enlist my father when I was, 12 years old. "Dad, buy a cabin. We're going to love it." He's like, "I didn't even get vacation. We'll never get up there." So, but it was always a dream of mine, even sketching it. And I was reading every type of outdoor book, true stories usually of adventure. And what's odd is now I write them. I have my own
Yeah.
series with Macmillan that is called the True Rescue series, and it's for middle readers age 8 to 12, and they're true stories of survival and adventure. Like I was reading of Farley Mowat. It's just like, and I never planned to do this. It just kind of is a natural progression. But the cabin, so what eventually happened was, of course, I couldn't buy a cabin even with my paper route money. Later, in the book, I won't give the whole thing away, but my sister was in a terrible car accident, brain damage and paralyzed. And my dad and mom defied the doctors and said, we're taking her home. And they're like, she's still in a coma. She needs to stay in this rehab place. And they go, no, we can do a better job. And they're like, you don't know how to work the tubes. You don't know how to do anything. And they said, show us. So I was like, wow, I couldn't believe my parents pulled it off, and they did. And my dad, in particular, took care of her for the next 35 years. And most of the time, he was still working. It was incredible. But what happened was after that, of course, I grew much closer to him because I saw what kind of man he was and would try to help. But he surprised me by one day saying, I know you have a job now. I had just graduated from college, had a job. I know you're saving from the cabin. He goes, I'll give you a loan. I said, he said, you really want that dream, make it happen. And I was stunned, but now I see why, because he realized life is so fragile and he wanted me to realize that dream. And so, boom, I was off looking at properties, none of which we could afford, and finally found this ramshackle place way up in northern Vermont that I knew had potential. But I bought it on Christmas Eve, and there was so much snow. I wasn't quite sure what I was getting in terms of the lake below it, a small lake. Is it shallow? Was it weedy? But I just, at that age, you just go with it. It's like, seems right. Okay, where do I sign?
It's so cool. Yeah, I love that. I love that scene of you showing up there on the snowshoes. Such a great scene of trying to get home in time for Christmas dinner. I want to kind of drill down a little bit more on the father-son relationship. One of the things that I took away from my own kind of meditation on that relationship is that there's this generational kind of cause and effect, where one generation will do, like, let's say my grandfather did something some way, and then my father made a point to like correct that. And then I observed what my father did, and then I made some adjustment for how I'm raising my daughter. I'm wondering if you had a similar experience, or obviously your understanding of your father evolved over the course of his life and your life. But was there some type of cause and effect that you could observe?
And I think you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about with our own kids. Through osmosis, I was trying to take in the things I admired most about my dad, but also rectify some things he didn't do with me when it came to my son and daughter. And that was to not be a helicopter pilot, but to try and talk more when there was problems rather than blow up, which used to be the case with my dad and I. So I just had that conversation with my son, who's now 30. And I said, boy, a couple times you pushed me to the limit, Brian. I remember one time I grabbed you like this and I said, are you listening to me? And he goes, you did that to me 3 times. And he said, but we did talk. And he said, and now that I'm reading your book, I understand how different it was for your generation growing up, where most of the time dads and sons, and maybe dads and daughters, I don't know because I wasn't the daughter, but didn't really sit down and say, okay, what's the problem? And let's talk this out. Maybe I can help. So I think, I think hopefully I've taken a step forward, and maybe when they have kids, they'll improve on whatever my shortcomings were as a parent.
Right. You've written dozens of books. I know this isn't, if I'm not mistaken, this isn't your first memoir of sorts, because I think you wrote another one relating specifically to the cabin, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
Um,
that one was a lot more lighthearted. When I compared the two, I realized, boy, the waters between us gets a lot deeper than there's a porcupine in my outhouse.
Right. Yeah. So that was kind of what I wanted to ask about is what was that experience like for you as an author where you're having, I know you said earlier that you did your best to be transparent and not only with the characters and your family and your friends, but also with yourself. What was that experience like, and how has it been now that the book is being read by others? Because I think that you go from that closed door, safe space to now your laundry is on everyone's front lawn. So how does that feel?
I'm still waiting for some of the family feedback yet. I haven't got
Right.
it, whether pro or con. It's been kind of quiet there, but a couple of nice things that have happened is someone I haven't seen since I was 13 years old contacted me, and he is in the book. And the email was 2 pages, and it was like, "Your memory's good, Mike. I do remember that ice fishing trip where the ice, we used a screwdriver to make a hole in the ice to try and catch the trout." And he went on, and so I haven't seen him yet, but we made plans to get together. He's in South Carolina. And so I'm 65 years old. How many years is that?
Right.
That's, 50 some odd years. So it was good to hear that my memory was okay, because I don't think I have a good memory. I certainly don't have a good short-term memory, but my long-term seems to be very vivid on some of these scenes that are in the book. So I'm still waiting for some of the response from family members. One cousin I did hear from, who I said, my dad would not have liked this book. I emailed her, and she said, "Why?" And I said, he didn't want any credit or attention of what he was doing. He used to say to me, "Other people do the same, so I know you're a writer. Don't point this out." And I wrote back to her, "How could I write a story about growing up without including this tragedy?" And his response, and I just got her email back today, and it said, "You couldn't. You had to.
Right.
You couldn't leave that out."
Did you find it personally therapeutic to write this book? Because one of the, I think, most painful lines in the book, and I believe it's in the introduction, or maybe it's even on the back cover, is this line where, I'm going to paraphrase, I think you say, "I know my dad loved me, but I know that he liked me."
Yeah.
And wondering if exploring that relationship, did that bring you any peace, or did you feel like the relationship had been mended by that point?
I thought it brought me more a sense of peace, and I'm so glad you picked that line out. I had forgotten all about that, but that was exactly how I felt growing up. Intuitively, I knew he was a good provider and he loved me, but I always felt like he doesn't like me, and I don't know how to fix that. So writing it was very difficult. I'm trying to think if I had any confidants through the process. I wish I knew you, Robert. I probably would have called you during the process, because now that I think about it, it was kind of a lonely effort with nobody really proofreading it or giving me feedback. And I'm just going, I was like, okay, I want to channel Bill Bryson for the funny stories, walk in the woods, but I want to do the Maya Angelou to be really honest. And that was kind of my guide.
Yeah, I do want, I don't want to give away too much, but that the chapters surrounding your sister's accident, I think, do this incredible portrayal of your father's just strength that he'd been carrying with him his whole life, with getting up at 4 a.m., going to the bakery, never sitting down, never taking lunch, almost like there was this unspoken integrity about how you did things. And
Yes.
again, just to point out one beautiful line, and again, I'm going to paraphrase, but I think you ask him, about just the obvious burden of caring for an adult that can't do anything for themselves, having to get up and take her to the bathroom and all these really
Right.
arduous things in the middle of the night. And he says, which I think is really probably one of the most beautiful lines in the book. He says, it's my honor to take care of your sister. And I thought that was just such a beautiful kind of connection with what he was as a parent, and
Yes.
probably connecting back to that earlier line with, I knew he loved me, but I didn't know if he liked me. Same thing, just there was this unspoken behavior that he was exhibiting over the course of his life
Right.
that maybe was unseen from the eye.
And the beauty of his actions, and I don't think I could have done it or most people, was if you're doing that kind of caregiving 24/7, it'll wear the normal person down. He never became bitter, and he, was such a social person. He would just tell his friends, I can't go out anymore, but you come here. And so there'd be people coming to the house all the time, and we'd have Lynn in a wheelchair, even though she couldn't feed herself. She'd be at the dinner table with his friends, and they'd be having a martini. He still loved life, and it took such a burden off me because I wasn't worried about him. I'm like, he's adapted to this. This is his life, and he's really made the very best out of it. He hasn't lost his sense of humor. It was remarkable.
Yeah, no, it really was.
Yeah, and then, a couple times and maybe people listening, they've done caregiving. A couple times when I would take care of Len for a night to let him get away with my mom, by the next day I was toast because you don't get any sleep. So how did he do it and yet keep his spirits up?
Yeah, and working the full-time schedule that he had.
Yeah, and then even later when he retired, this part isn't in the book, but so he was now about 80, still taking care of Lynn. I don't know how, he was just a strong man, but he was little like me, just wiry. He had to go in for quadruple bypass surgery. And I'm like, whoa. So this just came all suddenly. He's in the hospital. My brother and I had to quickly find a nursing home for Lynn, had to break the news to him while he's in recovery. But he adapted to that amazingly well. I thought he wouldn't at all. He just made part of his routine of going to the nursing home and spending 4 hours with Lynn every day. And everybody at the nursing home knew him, and he began to know all the other patients, and they'd all light up every day when he came in. It was just remarkable to see.
And what an incredible man. I mean, he does seem to exemplify kind of that greatest generation.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Strength.
The greatest, right, where they don't want any publicity. That generation, where we'd be my generation, we'd be tooting our horns and everything else. They were under the radar.
Right. So I know you've had a blockbuster film already happen for you. If this were to be made into a film, this is a game that my dad and I always love to play with my book. Who would you want to play the various characters?
Oh God, I watch so little.
Who would be playing you?
I watch so little movies. Oh my God. I honestly don't know because, in the book, I'm so young, it's basically covering age 12 to 22. So I don't know who we'd have in there. Yeah.
My dad's answer when I asked him was, do you think Brad Pitt's too old to play me?
You never know. And you know what? It's funny, with The Finest Hours, the hero of that story is Bernie Weber. And he used to tell me, Mike, you're wasting your time on this book. Nobody's going to buy it. And he was starting to convince me that's true. I was like, God, I've put in years into this book. And then one day he goes, I know you authors, you dream of movies. I go, we all do. And he goes, if they ever make a movie about this, I want Don Knotts to play me. So, and then Bernie, who was a wonderful man, he passed away before the book came out. If he could have known that they made a movie about his life,
Gosh, it's
that he
incredible.
was
Yeah.
joking about it, Don Knotts, and it was Chris Pine that ended up playing him. So he got a pretty good actor playing his part.
That's a great lead. Now looking forward, my experience when I wrote something personal, I was like, okay, I'm not going to be going down that road anytime soon. Like I did it. I'm ready to start telling other people's stories.
Yeah.
Have you found that to be the case for you, where you're thinking, okay, I'm ready to put that aside, and now I'm ready to go back into kind of my wheelhouse that is less personal, less going through my own history? Or do you feel like this could be an avenue that you might want to explore again in some way?
I'm definitely keeping an open mind because I'm the type of writer that frustrates literary agents because they would like me to stay with the books that have done really well, and I never stay in my lane. And if you were doing this just for financial reasons, I'd be much better off staying in that lane I've carved out of the true survival stories. But that's not me. So I hop from topic to topic, and now I'm doing these middle reader books and enjoying that. I could foresee a day when I write about the later years at the cabin, because then there'd be this trilogy. There'd be The Waters Between Us, Porcupine in the Outhouse, which covers just the first year of thinking I'm this tough mountain man living up there, and I didn't know what I was doing. And then the final, trilogy of the later years. So yeah, I'm open to it, and maybe that's why I've gone through so many literary agents.
Did your father get a chance to? Because just again, I'll reiterate the description for folks. But your father was an incredibly well-read man who collected hundreds of historical books and loved history. I mean, I think one of the great scenes in the book is when he dresses up for the reenactment, what was it, a Revolutionary War reenactment? Yes. With the full-on musket, and just so he loved history. As you started to carve your way in your profession, was he in awe of that?
I don't know if awe is the word. He was certainly proud, and that was great because there was so few things back in those days. He would always say, have you triple checked that fact? He's a stickler for the fact. He goes, I go, yep, we're good on those. So that was a great connection where I did a couple history books that he really got into. And one funny story about the Revolutionary War outfit. So now you jump ahead. He's, he's 85 years old, and he's just come back from the nursing home after visiting Lynn. It's Halloween, so he puts on his Revolutionary War outfit. I heard this secondhand from the people at the bar, and he goes to his favorite bar, which is a kind of an upscale place in Naples, Florida. And he walks in as a Revolutionary War soldier with the musket. and they had to say, Art, please put the gun back in the car. And he's like, but it's part of the outfit. And those people, when I went to that bar after he passed away, they were telling me so many stories. And I said, that's what I mean. He was larger than life. I don't know how he kept it all together, still had that sense of fun after putting in a tough day at 85 years old at the nursing home.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing because, you begin the book by really emphasizing the fact that you feel like the black sheep in the family. Everyone else is kind of in their lane and doing the right thing and getting the grades and behaving. And unless they're on an adventure with you, they're pretty much doing what they're supposed to do. Yeah. And yet in the end, it appears that you kind of fulfilled this like unspoken passion that he had. I mean, you became one of the books on the shelf, so it's this incredible arc, and I wonder do you think subconsciously there was something about that in you pursuing the life of a writer that connected to trying to not necessarily gain any approval, but that was a domain he obviously really respected. I mean, I forget the exact line you used, but he said
Right.
something about all a man needs is his books.
Yes, that's
And
exactly what he said.
and so I'm just wondering if in your pursuit as a writer, if that was kind of something in the back of your mind.
I co-wrote one book and did another historical novel on King Philip's Indian War. And people say, how do you get your passion for that? Where you've done 2 books on it, made yourself an expert. I said, my dad, in his library, he had a couple. And I used to say, who's King Philip? Because everywhere out in Western Mass, there's King Philip this, King Philip that. And he was the one person who knew. He said, oh, he was a Native American and he had this war and they almost won it. And he goes, it was a pamphlet that he gave me first. So whether subconsciously I was going, wow, he turned me on to this, now I'm going to really dive in and research it. It's hard for me to separate the two, my own interest in writing. But that particular topic is definitely because of his influence. And he was so happy to see those 2 books.
No, that must have been special. Absolutely.
Yeah,
it was great.
Amanda,
it's fine.
We have a hook. Okay.
Yeah, we have a couple pending questions. So we have 10 minutes or so. If you have more while we're asking the questions, feel free to submit them. Happy to answer them as they come in. But we will start with Ed Parsons, who has a question for Michael. If you've had any adventures or misadventures in the White Mountains.
In the Whites, I'm sure I have. They're not coming to me because I always kind of gravitated towards Vermont. Robert's probably got a whole handful of them.
I do actually, yeah. I was just thinking about your moose encounter. I had a very similar moose encounter on the Tuckerman Ravine Trail. It was pitch black dark. Came up on 2 moose on the trail, and I was pinned around a tree for about 20 minutes. So when I was reading that part of your book, I knew exactly that fear. It's terrifying.
Were the moose like not leaving you alone?
No, they were. So I was listening to a book on tape, and I didn't even.
There's your first mistake.
Exactly, and it was becoming dark, but unbeknownst to me. So I'm looking at all my foots, where my feet are supposed to go, and I suddenly look up. It's dark, and I see the silhouette of the moose right in front of me. And then I looked to my left, couldn't see anything, but I could hear the bull moose going through the trees, just taking limbs down.
Wow.
And so I was pinned there behind, and I didn't know anything, didn't know what to do.
Right.
So I called up a friend of mine who's a ranger, and that's how much time I had. I'm like stuck there, and he didn't answer. So I actually considered throwing a rock. I'm so glad I didn't. Now that I read your chapter on that, I realized I would have been mauled. But they eventually left, thankfully. I ran the rest of the trail.
Your instinct was good because someone I know said, I just kept the tree between me and the moose, because he said the moose was bashing the tree.
Yeah, that's what I figured. I mean, I thought that I wasn't going to be able to run them. I know they can run like 30 miles an hour on 3 feet of water. So it wasn't going to, had no chance.
Yep. So my misadventures were mostly in Vermont and in Western Mass.
So it sounds like you have a gap to fill, right?
You got a place to stay, Michael. You can come up to my cabin.
I'm going to take you up on it. I think we'd have a ball.
Let's
do
it.
So the next question we have from Adise Smith, who says that they're an avid reader of your True Life Sea Rescues. Do you have any more of those coming up?
I'm hoping to do one that's a compilation where you tell these, say, 7 or 8 stories, but at the end, I'd like to say what I learned from them about how this person did the seemingly impossible to get through it, like how they keep it together mentally and not just break down crying and give up. Because so many of these books that I've done, particularly fatal forecast where this man, Ernie Hazard, in late November, is in the North Atlantic, 100-foot rogue wave, pitch pulled his boat. He was the only one to live. The other crew members died. And he survives for 3 days being thrown in and out of a raft into the sea, which would have been, I don't know, in the 50-degree range. How's he do that? How's he keep going and he has to make a bunch of right decisions to keep living. That always intrigued me to expand on that, because I spent a week with him interviewing it, and I would say, how did you do that? I would have broke down and given up, and then you're going to die quickly and you'll be out of the pain. And he would tell me some techniques, and one technique would be, Mike, I didn't think beyond the next half hour. I took it in 30-minute increments. What do I got to do in the next 30 minutes to keep going? And he tried to think of something to make it a little better. So I do hope to do that book of compilation of a few new stories.
So as we wrap up, just a reminder for everyone, if you came in late, we do record these. So usually within 48 hours, this will be up on our Belmont Books YouTube channel, super easy to find. So you can catch up on things that you've missed, or if,
Excellent.
Robert and Michael wanted to share it around. So as we finish, Michael, do you have any final thoughts? Robert, any final questions on why everyone should pick up Michael's book?
Yeah, I do have just one last question. And it's, now that your father's passed away and he hasn't read the book, one, do you wish that you had shared it with him before he passed? And two, what advice would you give to, to everyone really who still has a parent around or has a child for that matter, and the importance of trying to open the dialogue and have conversations, because obviously once they're gone, you can't reopen that door.
Yeah, right. Don't hold back and do it. Exactly what you said. And I'm so glad I had that opportunity with my father for those later years, particularly after my mother passed away. It would be just him, me, and Lynn sometimes down in Florida. And we would have good conversations. So I'm so glad I had that. As far as the book goes, I don't know. He wouldn't want any attention. He may not be too happy about the book, but I just felt compelled to tell the full story of the growing up years, and warts and all on my part, and his story for exactly what he did, because I think it's inspirational. We're all going through a tough time with COVID, and he showed, hey, wait a minute, I can choose my response of how to be with this bad hand dealt to me. I can't change the hand. It's a terrible hand, what happened to Lynn, but my response, I can make it whatever I want. And I look back now and I said, he made his response inclusive. I'm going to keep my friends. I'm going to keep my boys, not become a bitter old man. And so I try to emulate that. It's very hard sometimes, but I do find it inspiring to go, what would my dad have done? He would have gone, this was his expression. I'll kind of close. When I would tell him a problem that maybe I thought was big, he'd go, like it was excellent. And I'd go, you're right. It is a small problem. I'll figure it out. We'd seen bigger problems together.
Right. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your book. I highly encourage everyone to pick it up. It's a real delight to read, and I think it will get everyone calling up their parents and or heading out into the woods. So really appreciate that contribution for all of us.
Yeah, and thank you to Belmont Books, and Robert, thank you for just a great discussion. I really appreciate it. You took the time to really read the book, and it was just, God, the time just flew.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. We'll do it again in the cabin.
All right, sounds good.
So thank you all so much for coming. I've put links in the chat if you want to order the books. If you want to stop into the store, we have both Robert and Michael's books on our shelves right now, so you can come in and grab them, get a cup of coffee. Our cafe is open. But thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and thank you to Robert and Michael.
Thank you all.
Happy to be here.
My pleasure.